Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Lisa Hanairo, Alder in the City of Middleton and the Secretary of the DCCVA. Thank you for joining us today for this roundtable on municipal referenda. We're going to hear four brief presentations in this 1 hour roundtable, and we're going to have a Q&A period after all the presentations are over. At that time, I'll either read the questions in the chat or else I'll call on people to unmute their lines. So if you'd rather ask your question instead of typing it, make sure to raise your hand at the end of the presentations. So in Dane County, we had 5 cities and villages with municipal referenda on the ballot last November. 4 of those were to increase the tax levy, and the 5th was to increase the annual fee for an existing stormwater utility. And we have the mayors of the 4 cities who had referenda with us today to share their experiences. Lessons learned from these efforts, I hope, will be enormously helpful to everyone, since referenda to exceed levy limits in particular will be a part of our futures probably for many years to come. So I thank all the mayors for taking the time today to help us all learn. First, we'll hear from Mayor Satya Rhodes Conway of Madison, where voters passed a $22 million referendum to avoid cuts to city staff and services. Then we'll hear from Mayor Mary O'Connor, who will talk about Monona's $3 million referendum, which eked out a win by, I think, just 32 votes. Mayor Julia Arata Frata of Fitchburg will speak to that city's referendum, which voters sadly rejected. And joining the mayor will be Chad Brecklin, the Fitchburg city administrator. And finally, we'll hear from my own mayor, Emily Kuhn, who will recap our stormwater utility referendum, which I'm happy to say 2/3 of our voters supported. Okay, Mayor Rhodes Conway, do you have slides?
I do,
Okay.
and
Then we'll let you share your presentation, and you've got 10 minutes,
great.
please.
Are
Thank you.
you, can you see
Yes.
the slides?
Yes, we can.
Great.
Thanks.
So I'm going to be relatively quick, hopefully. This is the very top lines on our referendum. So as you mentioned, it was this past November for 22 million. We did not include new projects. This was just to fill the gap between our cost to continue and what we're allowed to put on the levy. Um, And I'll talk a little bit about the work that we did to educate our community and then some of the messages that we used. And I will run pretty quickly through a bunch of slides that illustrate those messages. So just to start, um, we began this process in January of 2024, which is earlier than we usually start talking about our budget with the community, educating both our council and then working with our council office. We had 5 meetings around the community to talk about the budget overall and sort of the shape of the problem and why we had a problem. Um, I also just basically said yes to any invitation to speak around the community throughout the whole year. And often those were specific invitations to talk about the budget. But even if they weren't, I would make a point of mentioning the budget and the issues around it. And then later, once the council had chosen to put the referendum on the ballot, I would be talking about that as well. Just really wanted to be out in the community as much as possible, making sure that we were educating people um, about the nature of the problem, the root of the problem, and then what our proposed solution was. We did a fair amount of social media, and we did do 2 mailings, which I'll show you a sample of in a minute. Um, I think overall, in terms of the education, the biggest barrier for us was that people just simply do not understand the city budget. And so we had to start with just educating people about the budget, the fact that we have a capital budget and an operating budget, just the like super basic information. And then we had to describe why the state is creating or how the state is creating a problem for us. I was often asked why. That was a difficult one to answer. Um, but the how of it is obvious, and so we spent a lot of time on that. The other thing that I think was useful, and I'll show you an example of this in a minute, was that we laid out a sort of 5-year outlook on our operating budget, and that helped people understand how when I was saying, like, we're coming to you now for a referendum, but we hope to not have to come back again for at least 6 years, it helped people understand uh, how that might be possible and what that might look like. Um, the final thing I'll say on this slide is that we did have some outside help. So we had an organization, a 501(c)(4) that was formed, Friends of the City of Madison, that was able to raise money and do outside advocacy. So, for example, they got yard signs. They worked with our friends in labor. Our friends in labor did a couple of mailings that were specifically advocacy mailings, asking people to vote yes. They also printed lit that they did doors with. So it was very useful for us to have folks outside the city advocating for a yes vote. I think that made a big difference. So I'm just gonna, let's see. Um, Go through some of the slides that we use. So when I was asked to come and talk about the referendum or the budget, I had a whole slide deck that I would go through. I'm not showing you the whole deck, but just some things that were useful. So one point that was useful to talk about was our population growth and the needs of a growing city and the needs to support that with funding. We also talked about the impact of inflation and how that contributed to the gap that we were experiencing and why that was more important now. We spent a lot of time talking about the impact of the state, so looking at shared revenue, um, you know, because people were all sort of saying, well, they just fixed it, right? Like we did that, right? And so we had to really point out that actually, no, it wasn't a fix. And in fact, Madison was particularly not helped in the shared revenue deal. So we spent a lot of time educating on that. We talked a lot about the dynamic of how much the residents of Madison put in to the state budget and then how much we get back in state aid. This might not be persuasive for every community, depending on how much you contribute, but it is something to look at because it's people. This is a thing that generates some conversation in like, well, that's not fair. We should be getting more back from the state. Um, we did just sort of basic explainers. What are we talking about? What is a structural deficit? Why do we have it? What are the factors? Just to make sure people had good information. And then, more details on that. Um, this I think is probably useful for any municipality to look at how much you've been able to put on the property tax levy versus how much your costs have increased. And it's a pretty dramatic um, figure for Madison, and I'm sure it is for your communities as well. We also looked at our staffing growth versus our population growth and could show that we're about 10% behind where we ought to be if our staffing had kept up with our population growth. Again, might not be a relevant figure for every community, but something certainly to look at. Um, I I also tried to, with all of these, tell stories in addition to just giving people the figures. So, for example, in this one, I would always tell the story about how, despite adding new neighborhoods and new houses that where we need to be picking up the trash, we actually haven't authorized a new trash truck driver position for 7 years. And so that's a concrete example for people that they can understand, like they want their trash picked up, right? Um, we laid out all of the work that we've done over multiple years to contain costs and to bring the gap between our cost to continue and our levy down. Um, and I would always talk about how over three mayoral administrations, we've used all of the same tools because there's an effort to sort of make this political and about me. But this history, I think, really contradicts that, and people also really want to know that you have been doing things right, that you are trying to save money, you are trying to be efficient, in addition to asking them to pay more. We did put out two proposals. So, what happens if we can pass a referendum? What happens if we don't pass a referendum? So, we get to talk about the bad and the good and give people that contrast. And then here, as I mentioned before, we did lay out the 5-year plan. So we laid out the 5-year plan with a referendum, seeing how many years we can keep the budget balanced. We laid out the 5-year plan without the referendum, noting that it would be hard for us to balance the budget much sooner than if we did have the referendum. And I think this, again, gave people some certainty that we weren't going to come back immediately. A lot of the conversation in Madison came around our rainy day fund and why we couldn't just use our rainy day fund to cover the gap. So we had to talk a lot about the difference between one-time funds and ongoing funds and try and illustrate that effectively. Um, it's another slide on the rainy day fund. We also had a lot of conversation about, well, there's all these new big buildings. Um, why are they not just paying more property tax? And so we had to talk a lot about what levy limits mean and why new construction doesn't actually help the situation as much as you would think it would. So that is a concept that I think is important for all of us to both understand and communicate well around. We talked about the budget cycles and why it was not likely that we were going to get help this year, but maybe we would get help in future years. And so just really wanted to because some people were saying, oh, well, we should just go and ask the legislature and they'll solve it for us next year. Well, so we had to talk about why that probably wasn't going to happen. Um, we talked about how this is actually not uncommon. Many communities are facing these problems, and look across the state and look even just here in Dane County, the number of communities going to referendum. We talked about the state surplus and why they should give us more money. Um, and then we talked about the impact of the referendum on your average home and what that would look like. And so these are very ballpark numbers, particularly for renters, but people really wanted to know what it would mean for them. We also really liked talking about the 60 cents a day number. Like that's less than a cup of coffee, folks. So putting it in perspective for people about what it would mean for them. Um, so just another thing on the impact, the actual language we explained, and then these are it's example of the mailers that we sent out. This was from the city using city dollars, so we had to keep them very much just simply educational and not advocacy at all. But you can see an example of that. And that is it for me. I'm happy to answer questions going forward. Thank you.
Great. And Mayor, you can stick around with us till the end. Is that right? Okay, good. Then we'll hold the questions until the end. I will say though, I loved the slide showing the state shortchanging the city. I think that's an effective slide. And also the slide showing what you have done over the years to try to address deficits. That's one of the questions I was going to pose.
Yeah,
Okay,
these
go ahead.
slides are posted on the city's website if people want to. We had a whole web page on the referendum. I'll drop the link. But if people wanted to look at what we did in more detail, that's all publicly available.
Great. Thanks for that. Okay, next we'll go to Mayor Mary O'Connor with Monona. Mayor,
Okay.
do you have slides?
Yeah, our city administrator Neil Steck-Schulte is going to be handling the slides while I do the talking. So
Okay, great. Thank you.
at least some of this certainly is going to overlap what Mayor Rhodes Conway told you. But lessons learned from the municipal referendum for Monona. Neil, you want to go to the next slide? Okay, this is just a summary of our operational referendum. The
Okay.
green is kind of just to emphasize certain things, but we're 100% landlocked, no new areas to expand to, so we can only grow our assessed valuation and levy through redevelopment, which is complicated. We've done quite a bit of it and have a lot more being considered, but it all takes a while. So we've had a major issue the last couple of years, multiple years of inflation outpacing our net new construction number, which was 0.45% for 2023 and 24 combined. And that's, as you all know, impossible. Our referendum asked to increase the operating levy by 3 million just to maintain current operational levels. We basically had four areas we were focused on. One was inflationary adjustments just to basic operational costs. I had kept staff at either 0 or 1% increases for the last 4 or 5 years for just basic operating costs, and you just can't keep doing that year after year. A big piece was needing to compensate our employees at a higher funding level. We were losing employees to other municipalities, and a lot of it, they would tell us, we love working at Monona, we want to stay here, but if somebody's going to offer me 10,000 more to do the same job, I have to take it. Then we also had an issue with not enough funds for overtime and paid on-premise wages for public safety staff. And then finally, we're seeing a lot of increased, excuse me, contracted costs for things like garbage and recycling and IT services. So the referendum passed 94% turnout in Monona, and it passed by 32 votes, which was pretty amazing, I thought. So next slide, Leo. Neil. This is a slide that illustrates why weren't bringing in enough in increased tax levy. Shows the annual CPI over the last 4 or 5 years, and then how much our net new construction number was. So it's pretty obvious we had a big problem. Neil, you want to move on? Our process, we had been talking about this in multiple venues for years. Whenever the budget came up, and I would, we'd explain to people how at some point we're going to have to go to referendum, and this is why. We knew, since a big part of this was the compensation plan, the compensation issue, we did a full compensation study at the end of 23. That was completed last January so that we could show people why our employees, so many of them, were underpaid. Then we hired Miller Communications out of Milwaukee to serve as our communications consultant. We don't really have anybody on staff that does graphic design or anything like that. They helped us put together an informational website, and then we did a community survey with asking people what they felt about 3 different options of what they might be willing to support. I know a lot of school districts in particular have done this kind of thing in the past to get a good idea of what your voters might support. Then we established the referendum question with DOL process you have to go through, and it has to be worded a certain way. We created multiple budget scenarios of how we would respond if it passed or didn't pass. And then we did a lot of active public engagement efforts. We had our website, we did 3 direct mailings, we had 2 public information meetings. We have a monthly newsletter, so we had information in there, a lot of interviews with media, social media. This city administrator or I were at the farmers market. We had a booth there for the last couple months during the fall. I normally go there once a month, but one or the other of us was there every week to answer questions. And we had one-on-one meetings with residents if they asked us. And then the vote passed in November, and we considered and passed the new budget in December. So next slide. This was the question of the 3 questions on our survey. This is the one that got the most support. 59% would definitely yes or probably yes support it. Obviously, the end result was like 50.2% or something like that, but it was enough to pass it. So we had 2 other questions, each adding additional, asking for funding to allow us to add additional staff in people. We didn't get even a 50% support for that, so we just didn't even bother asking that question, although we do need additional staff, and that's something we're going to have to look at in the future. Next slide. This is kind of 2 different ways of looking at the question. This is the question the way the state made us write it, which, you look at that and it's like, what? And then Neil put together this graphic that more or less showed exactly what it would mean. Basically, we had to ask for the entire increase up front, even though we didn't necessarily need all of it at the very beginning, but that's just the way the state requires you to do it. But it showed the impact on people's property taxes over the next 5 years, because we also plan on a 5-year basis. And this assumed minimal net new construction. We will have some, but it won't be nearly enough. So Next slide. This is a sample of some of our mailings. This was a big number. If they to pass it, the impact on a median value home is 435,000. It would be an increase of $713 per owner of of the median priced home. Well, that's a huge huge increase. So we tried to just in our mailings again. We weren't doing any advocacy. We were just trying to explain exactly what we were asking for and why we were doing it. We had these available also in Spanish. And we did 3 mailings over the course of about 6 weeks. The next slide, Neil. Lesson learned. Be ready to explain the limits placed on the referendums. You can only hold them at certain times. The question has to be phrased a certain way. DOR is very involved. How municipal referendums are have to be structured differently than school referendums. For example, Monona Grove has had a couple of operating referendums, our school district, over the past few years. They can build in a percentage increase every year. The way municipalities have to do it, you can't do that. You have to ask for the full amount at one time, and then hopefully it extends out over the 5 years or whatever that you're planning. So you have to take a really good look at what you think your needs are going to be. Again, as Mayor Sacha said, provide a list of recent cost savings measures that we've already taken. Start the public information effort as early as you can, especially explaining municipal finance. People just don't understand it. Share what definitions are, net new construction, operating budget. We had a financial audit report at the beginning of September. A lot of people didn't understand that. Share how your operating budget is made up. I mean, a big percentage of ours is public safety and the impact of what the maintenance of effort requirements are for public safety. Why don't you cut everything 10%? Well, we can't do that. And we don't want to cut our public safety 10%, that kind of thing. Capital versus operating budgets, really hard for people to understand that. We had a lot of, well, if you don't have enough money, for staff salaries, why did you build that new park shelter or whatever? And people just don't understand that money comes from 2 different pots. Also, how property assessments impact property tax bills. People don't understand that at all, that all your property assessment really does is determine what percentage of the overall city tax levy you pay. And that's very difficult for people to understand. And then we got into bond ratings and capital improvement plans and structural deficits. Again, with ARPA money, you want to spend that on one-time money you shouldn't be spending on new employees or whatever. And then also explain the different taxing entities on your tax bill. We had a situation with our school district. They had a big financial issue that came up in August. We were hoping to do more promotion of the referendum through them and their newsletters, getting out information about it. And they were like, you probably don't want to be anywhere near us. And there's also people who think that the city controls the school district budget, which, as you know, we don't do that either. So we spent a lot of time countering misinformation and misunderstanding. And then people misunderstand, but then there are also people out there who are actually promoting disinformation that they know isn't correct, but putting it out there anyway. So we had suggestions like, why doesn't the city institute a sales tax and that kind of thing? So you had to explain a lot of the way state law works. Neil, next slide. And I guess be clear about what the potential impacts a failed referendum is going to have. For us, there would have been serious cuts. They would have been not as bad in the first year, but ongoing year after year. It would have been just really devastating for all the things that people move to Monona for, which is our parks and our library and those amenities, you have to be prepared to justify any recent new positions or major capital expenditures, and be prepared to discuss your referendum, in the context of other jurisdictions, because, they will bring up people will bring up other cities' referendum questions and what they're asking for. And not everyone is in the same financial situation that Monona is in. Example, the net new construction thing. So you need to explain why we're different. Local union and interest group support. I think was key, especially our fire union was out doing doors. They did a couple of mailings. A group of our alders pooled money together to buy yard signs. Yard signs are pretty influential in Monona. And then encourage locals to come out and publicly support the referendum if they're willing to. And we had a lot of people post things on Facebook or wherever supporting it. And I think overall, you just can't overengage the community trying to explain things to them. And then I guess the only other thing, use qualified third-party sources to verify what you're telling people so that if they want proof of what you're talking about, you can point to sources that they should check for that. So I think that's everything we have. And again, feel free. We have our website is still up, and and I both can answer questions when the time comes.
Great. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Neil. Yeah, we're doing a compensation study this year and looking forward to having that as documentation for a future levy limit referendum here in Middleton. Okay, next.
I'm just
go
going to
ahead.
have just one thing about the compensation study. Be prepared to explain to people how that works also, because
Yeah.
we got some people getting very into these granular details that it was very hard to explain why we wanted to give certain salaries to certain positions. And so be prepared for that.
Thanks. Okay, next we'll turn to Fitchburg, who had a different experience than Madison and Monona. So Mayor, I see Chad's bringing up the slides. Whenever you're
Yes,
ready.
Chad is gonna start the presentation and I'm gonna finish it, okay?
Okay, great. Thanks. Go ahead, Chad, whenever you're ready.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can you see my slides? Excellent.
Yes.
Thank you. As Mayor Radefrada mentioned, I'll kick off the presentation, and then ultimately I'll turn it over to her. You'll see as we work through the process that we utilize, it's very similar to Monona, but in addition to a different result to Monona and Madison's referenda, our referenda was also different, as you'll see as we get into this presentation. Those two referendum were largely cost to continue, and our referendum was largely to add new staff and enhance existing services. So looking at forecasting of the need, we work with Ellers, our financial management firm. Every year they do a presentation to the city council that outlines and forecasts what our budget situation will be. They had identified some shortfalls in a 10-year forecast. However, the city was able to manage those shortfalls.
You're all good to go.
Okay, great.
I will let you know, like, you can see
Excuse
it.
me, Chad,
The-
please make sure to mute your line if you're not speaking. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. We had been able to manage those shortfalls, but we weren't really able to add the amount of staff that we had needed in relation to the growing community. We used a couple of TID closures, a shared revenue increase, and the absorption of our portion of the town of Madison as ways to help close our deficits. But we were also able to add some staff with some of these avenues, but not enough to keep pace with the need. We are projected to have about $1 million deficit within 5 years. The referendum would have had a small amount of funding to cover that. A new police facility is in the works. That's also driving our need to increase the levy. We have additional need for public safety staffing as well as other staffing throughout City Hall, of which we had completed an organizational review back in August of 23 that projected our staffing needs for the next 3 to 5 years and identified a need for 11 new positions. That was and then we also asked that our department heads during the budget process of 2023 to identify what they believe their staffing needs to be. And you might not be surprised to know that our department heads felt that we needed about 45 new staff, not 11. So we had a couple of things there that were driving some of the staffing needs. And then, of course, the city has identified a need to expand its transit services within our community. Whoops. So as we led up to a referendum, we looked at alternate revenue sources in June of 23, and ultimately the Common Council decided that they wanted to pursue the referendum option. We hired Miller Communications, much like Monona did in September of 23. They completed our assessment of services and staffing needs. And then staff provided to our Common Council a number of different options, ranging from 2.2 million to 5.8 million, covering a variety of different areas, as you can see in the slide. These ultimately were the examples that we utilized for our Common Council. The numbers are based upon the impact per month on the average single-family house. So for instance, option 15 is the $15 a month option, all the way up to a $40 a month option. So you can see what the impact was at the time this was originally put together, was on a $381,000 average assessed single-family home. That switched through the process to $457,000 or $452. It's reflected in one of the next slides. We did a community survey in the spring of 24, both in English and Spanish. One was sent to every residential address in the city, asked about priorities. We ended up with about a 14% response rate. Our community prioritized these items in the following order. Public safety staffing was far and away the highest scored priority. And then minimum staffing, which was a smaller number of non-sworn or non-public safety staffing that was identified in the options. Operating costs for our police services facility, transit, and then a full comprehensive city staffing plan, which would have been obviously the highest of the options received, along with transit, some of the lower scores as far as priorities for the community. When you look at the dollar amount options that were presented in the survey, you can see this line represents 50% of the respondents. Approximately 48% of the respondents favored the $3.6 million option or more, and approximately 56% of the survey respondents supported $2.9 million or more. That unfortunately became quite foreshadowing of the ultimate results, which the mayor will get to here in just a minute. So obviously we needed to determine the timing of the referendum. There was quite a bit of discussion in our case with the Common Council between going in August or November. Ultimately, November was chosen due to the higher likelihood of a higher voter turnout. One of the considerations we did utilize is whether or not there would be other referenda on the ballot here in Fitchburg. We were pretty confident that the Madison Metropolitan School District would have a referendum in November, and that would largely impact all of our Aldermanic District 2 and a small portion of Aldermanic District 3. And there were some concerns that if residents would only vote for one of those options, that perhaps they might be more likely to choose the school option versus local government. Ultimately, Common Council went with a referendum at just under $3.6 million to fund 5 police positions, 6 fire positions, 3 general city staff positions, ongoing operating costs for the new police services facility, improvements to our transit system, and then a small amount, which equated to about $500,000 that would be used for other city operating costs, including an increase in wages for our part-time firefighters. You can see this is one of the slides we used in the referendum for folks to see where the referendum amounts were going. You could see it was heavily focused on public safety. Nearly 2/3 of the referendum was a public safety referendum in effect. You can see here the impact on the average or median value single-family home in the city of Fitchburg with the amount that was selected was just going to be under $25 a month or $300 a year. From an outreach and education perspective, we did 3 direct mailers to residents. Miller Communications helped us with all 3 of those mailers. We also hosted 7 outreach sessions, 4 of them in person, 1 occurring in each of our 4 aldermanic districts. And then we did 3 virtual education sessions. And then, of course, we use social media in both paid and unpaid campaigns to get information and education out to our residents. Mayor, I'll turn it over to you. This is the results portion.
Okay, thank you, Chad. So the result, as you know, our referendum failed. Yes, 44% of the people voted yes, 53% no, and that one is aligned with the 2.9 million that Chad mentioned in the previous slide. So we stretched what we were asking to the people, and I think we failed that. One of the districts, only one district, District 2, was the one with the past the referendum. That district, I think the council members from that district were very active in informing the residents. And District 4 is more the rural district where we saw the biggest difference. At the same time, as Chad mentioned, we had the Madison School District was at the same time in the ballot. And we have almost 2 districts that, were part of that referendum too. Can you move to the next one? So what are the potential factors that we thought that our referendum failed? So we have a work group meeting after 2 weeks the referendum failed, and we analyzed and did an assessment. One of the things that a couple of things that we came into our mind was the referendum fatigue. The city of Fitchburg doesn't have we don't have our own school district. We have 3 school districts, and in the last couple of years, the 3 school districts have been doing referendums. So if you live in the part of Verona, you have been having a couple of referendums in the last 5 years. The same with Oregon and Madison. So the timing of the outreach. We should have started with our outreach early September, where we came late in October, when also some of the early voting started. And so that one, we have only 1 month, I think, full month to do the outreach in full. So we think that one could affect, the people that didn't know that some of the people that were voting that they had this referendum on the ballot. The timing with the market reevaluation and update. So some of you already mentioned, we did a reevaluation last year, and then people, they don't understand, that double-digit assessment increases can affect also how the relation with the revenue and the tax calculation. So going through this process on all this public meeting with the residents, we noticed that there is a lack of understanding of how, our property taxes work, how our budget work. So that one was an open eye to see what else we can do if we move forward in the future with a referendum, and how to, face those questions. Next one. The other thing that we couldn't explain very well was people say, oh, but you are growing so fast. You're building all this, apartment complex neighborhood. Why the growth cannot absorb those staffing or all those new costs? And I think we didn't have a good answer to that, how to explain that. That is something that we need to improve for the next time. We didn't have enough elected official or community members sharing information or advocating for the referendum. On the contrary, we have a no campaign organized by former mayors with a lot of misinformation. So that one was another thing that I wish we had, that more of our elected officials were more engaged with the process. Also, there was a community trust in elected official government. Some of them, they don't understand how our budget or our capital expenses and operational expenses work, how do we fund some of our projects. So they were calling that we are spending money in the pet project, is too many consultants, and we should reallocate those funding for staffing. And the other thing that I think it was the biggest one is our referendum didn't have a sort of a sense of urgency, like Madison or Monona. We were telling people, if the referendum doesn't pass, we are going to cut all these services, or we are not going to be able to, to continue to provide
Great, thank you.
And the
go
other
ahead.
thing I want to mention is that we had a fire union. They did a lot of outreach for us. They sent mailers and they did doors too. That one helped too. Yeah.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Chad. With an active no campaign, I think you all did pretty well, results-wise, all things considered. So that's something people can learn from. All right, so we've heard about levy limit referenda, and now we'll turn to the city of Middleton and Mayor Emily Kuhn, who will talk about our successful efforts to have voters approve an increase in our stormwater utility fee.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your service and your leadership today, Alder Hanairo. I know you serve as secretary. Is that accurate? Okay, excellent. I'm super glad to see your leadership with the DCCVA, and I appreciate the DCCVA hosting this forum. It is something we've talked a little bit amongst ourselves as mayors. The city of Middleton shared, I think it was our 2022 referendum in which we worked on getting additional staff and some pay increase. A lot of the things that the other cities were working on this last year, where we pivoted to a utility increase. And so I think that it's good to share our example, especially since we had, the 2022 successful campaign and the referendum, and then this one as well this past November. And the difference that I shared with the mayors previously was that with the utility, we had a sunset utility that we were replacing. So the cost, and I might lean on Alder Hanairo for a recall, but I think it was about $40 was being removed from our fees. And the reason that that's important is that was from the 2018 flood. And so a former council put on this 5-year plan to increase our stormwater fees. And I sat on the utility board for about a year, and it was such a great educational experience. But we were talking back then when I was on council that we needed to go back. And the reason was that a lot of the things that were built over the last few decades weren't either being audited or maintained. Think about, a homeowners association, and a little pocket neighborhood pops up. This happened in my former Alder district. The houses were built around 2017, 2018. And then when right around 2022, when we were going door knocking and things like that, I heard from someone, who takes care of this, this pond area, is it mine? And it was the next door neighbors, but it wasn't being maintained to the point that it wasn't effective in capturing water anymore. And so it turns out those new neighbors thought that the city was supposed to take care of it. They had bought the house, so there was no developer there. And so part of what we had to do in Middleton was figure out, what did we actually need? What were those resources that we need to maintain what we had and build out what we need in the future? And how do we mathematically describe that? So for everything that Mayor Satya and Mayor Mary were describing in their successful campaigns, ours was a little bit different. And my thoughts are with the Mayor of Fitchburg, Mayor Julia. I hope that your next referendum goes well and those lessons learned. But here in the city of Middleton, we had a successful stormwater utility referendum in November. It passed with 64% approval. Its purpose was to ensure sustainable funding for Middleton's stormwater utility needs, addressing infrastructure, water quality, and flood mitigation. Because we were talking about that next time we have a large flood, whether it's a 500-year or 1,000-year, we want to make sure we have the infrastructure we need to do our best with it. We will never prevent floods, but we can do better every time. So one of the things I do want to say is echoing the mayor of Madison and Monona, is that some of our alders got involved. I know that our alder on the call was very engaged and made sure that we were all cheering it on. And I'm grateful to her leadership on this referendum, as well as our friends of Pheasant Branch Conservancy. They were outstanding as partners. There were other neighbors that came to town halls. There were other people that did the Facebook and the social media pages. But the Friends of Pheasant Branch, if I remember correctly, they were the ones that were the yes signs. They also did come and speak at our city council for the 3 minutes of public comments. Their co-chair, co-president came and spoke. He was delightful to have. And there was definitely some doors and neighbors talking to each other on that. So grateful to those community partners and our city council leadership and their support of the referendum. So the process and public engagement followed a lot of what was already said. Our initial challenges is a little bit of what I was talking about, is what was that real need and how do we figure out what that dollar amount is? And then how do we explain it? So I went to everyone remember we voted for this in 2018, it might have been 2019, and it sunsets after 5 years. And so we're replacing that, and the additional cost, I think it was about $35, was to go ahead and maintain the things we already had and start building out, like auditing and building out future. And so people really appreciated that. So we worked to build that case and do those outreach and communication. We did have 2 open houses. Was not heavily attended, sharing that with Mayor Julia, because sometimes we think, well, maybe if we just got a few more people to those town halls, we would then pass it. So, that tack might have been done through our Friends of Pheasant Branch. It might have been through our mailers or the Whisper campaign from neighbor to neighbor. But it was definitely that engaged community groups that I think really helped us move it forward. Educating the public, we focused on transparency, like what is this really for, that community impact and equity, because we wanted to make sure that the fees were fairly distributed based on property impact, which is a little different that we could do. A lot of times churches don't pay, the operations or nonprofits. Well, with a stormwater utility, it's a property. So our final advice is to plan early and be transparent. Pretty sure I already heard that. Leverage your data and stories, engage your partners, and be adaptable. And just really grateful to be here today to share our story, because some of our communities may not be looking for the referendum like the other cities had. They might be looking at stormwater utilities or another utility. But if they can borrow from our best practices, we're happy to share. And since you know Secretary Hanairo from these calls, please feel free to reach out to her in the future. I can take questions today, but she's a great resource and her leadership is so well appreciated. So thank you, Alder Hanairo.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate the kind words. And if I could just add a couple things, I want to underscore, the mayor mentioned the Friends of Pheasant Branch Conservancy. I don't think the referendum would have passed if it weren't for them, because they were like our Miller. They went out, got the signs, they were handing out flyers at our Good Neighbor Festival, and they're a very trusted NGO in this community, and a lot of people, frankly, are members of it. So without their help, I'm not sure we would have had such a successful result. I'll also mention that we use this referendum as a way to stave off having a levy limit referendum sooner than we needed to, because we explained to people we need to do this because right now our stormwater utility, not only are we going to be losing, it was going to go from $45 a year to $15 starting in January this year. Not only would we lose that money, but we needed actually more money. We needed more like $92 a year from people to pay for things like stormwater or street sweeping and leaf collection, things like that. And so explaining to them that we wanted to base our ask of the residents on what it actually takes to manage an excellent stormwater utility. That was the educational piece that we had to do. And going through the flood in 2018, I think, really helped people to understand this is important stuff. So now with that, the success with that referendum, we're able to balance the budget by moving costs around, and now we just have to look forward to the next opportunity to go to the voters. So, okay, well, with that, we will. Oh, and I see Brian Gatto, our city administrator, has shared the Middleton referendum website for those who are interested. And now, time for questions. I'm learning a ton, and I have questions, but I want to hear from the attendees as well. So while everybody's thinking, I'll ask a couple. So the timing of the referendum, we've heard that you can never start too early to do the educational piece, especially, oh my gosh, trying to explain municipal finance and the impact of state legislation. What are your thoughts on holding a referendum in November when you would expect the biggest turnout versus August or April? We debated which one to do. I believe our original stormwater utility referendum was either the original one or the one to add the surcharge for the flood was an April event. For this one, I argued in favor of going for November because I feel, as a matter of principle, the greater the participation, the better the results. So, Mayor Rhodes Conway, we'll start with you. What do you
Yeah,
think?
I completely agree with you. I think there would have, I mean, we did talk about this a lot because obviously we had the school referenda on the same ballot as us. And there was a lot of people that were concerned internally that that people were going to pick and choose, right? And that if they were going to pick and choose, they were going to be more likely to vote for the schools than the city. I was worried about that, but I felt like the turnout and the nature of the electorate was too much of an advantage to pass up. We did also um, think about, like, was there any way we could get through another 2 years and wait till 2026 and go on the November 2026 ballot? We were a little worried about the convergence of messaging with a governor's election and us going to referendum. So we did talk through all of those political considerations and the competition with the other referenda, and ultimately decided that you don't really want to wait too long, first of all, and if you go and fail, then you have the subsequent elections that you can try on. The other thing I will say, just in light of the MMSD referenda, we did hire the same consultant that the school district used. So we hired Spector Rowe, who has done, I think, the last several school district referenda that have been successful. And so we did want to have the same folks working for us so that we could stay as coordinated as possible and try and lift up similar messaging themes if possible. And we're happy with their work.
Great. Any other mayors want to chime in on the timing of when you have a referendum?
I just
Nope.
say I agree, but for us, we didn't really have a choice. By the time we got all our information together, it was too late to do it in August, but I'm happy we did it in November anyway because of the turnout, but we could not afford to wait another year. We were talking cuts starting in January, so.
Yeah, this is Emily in Middleton. We did do in April, I think for the utility, for the first utility that was sunset, might have been in November. And I want to say when we did our increase in staffing referendum, no, that was a November one as well. I always try to go more for a spring election, but open to the November. And the reason for my thoughts on the spring is we tend to get just people who are more engaged in local civic, the nuances, and they tend to have a better understanding of budget, or perspectives. Now, you do get a higher volume of voters in November, so there might be some benefit there, and maybe that's why Middleton has gone in that direction. But I am open to either one, especially if it's a smaller, like a utility. I think we could have pushed it off, but I'm glad that we went ahead and did it. We did not have the school district referendum this time. I want to say when we did the 2022, the large ask, there was a school district. So we were concerned, as Mayor Satya was saying, about Madison and the school district being on at the same time. And that was our concern, but both did pass at that time. But we still are trying to hear from our voters because at the end of the day, those property taxes, that's the thing I keep hearing about. Everything is going up in costs, but when you explain and you have good reason, they usually get it, and they're fairly supportive, if not excited, especially our spring voters, those that are really paying attention to those potholes and those snow plows. If they're working, they're pretty excited if you're working for them. So Fitchburg, I don't know, maybe you just need that a version of the Friends of Pheasant Branch that we had that helped us get over towards that 60%. Maybe you need to find that yes group. But
Great.
open to either November or April.
Great, thanks. I'm not seeing any questions in the chat, nor am I seeing hands raised, so I'm going to go on with another question of my own. We talked about the need for good education and information on how things work. So how did you all communicate to residents that having to use the referendum process to raise taxes is a feature and not a flaw? That is, how did you counter the argument that you must have mismanaged the budgets all these years, and that's why you keep coming to the voters for more money?
So we did two things that I think were helpful, and one is the slide that I showed with the years and years of work that we had done to fill the gap between our cost to continue and what we're allowed to put on the levy. I think that was very helpful. I think the other thing that was really helpful was showing other municipalities that have gone to referendum and how it really was not a Madison problem. It was a structural problem created by the state that multiple municipalities are facing.
Thank you. Mayor O'Connor or Arata Frada?
I'd say the same for us, including our slide that showed how much inflation had increased and how little we could increase. We also heard about, well, we're a small community. We shouldn't be compared to what it costs to pay people in Madison or these other larger communities, but we all live in Dane County. It's expensive wherever you live, so we had to counter some of that too. But I think, and people also, when we talked about how small our staff is, I mean, they want all these things, but if you only have 2 workers in your parks department, well, you can only do so much, that kind of thing. So that helped. I think people made a lot of assumptions about things that once they heard what the real story was, like, oh, I can see why you need that. So.
Mayor Arata Frada, did you want to add something?
No, the only thing that we did is the city of Fitchburg in the last 10 years grew 35% the population, and we are trying to also to see how that growth considered with the growth of our resources. And we talk about resources, we talk about staffing. So and also showing them that, we are doing all these incredible services to them, but understaffed, but I think that, as I mentioned before, we were not able to communicate with them why, even though we are growing as a community and we have all this growth, we cannot not absorb those costs or staffing costs in our growth. I think we need to do a better job in that.
Great. Thank you. Well, it's 1 o'clock or 1:01. I could go on for another hour asking questions, but we have this as a resource, the recording and the slides and the web pages that people have shared. So I want to thank all the mayors for their participation, and also Chad and Neil for their assistance as well. And I really want to thank Anne at DCCVA for being the backbone and holding us all together on this. Thanks, Anne, for your support. And I guess with that, Anne, is there anything you wanted to say? Reminders about future events?
Not at this moment. I will just say I'm recording this, so I will make this recording available with a link in our next newsletter on Monday.
Okay, and I hope to see everyone at a future membership meeting or roundtable. And with that, our roundtable is concluded. Thank you all. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.